In the early years of the 19th century, Robertson County, Tennessee, was a quiet place. Its rolling hills and fertile farmland made it a welcoming home for settlers pushing westward after the Revolution. Neighbors lived miles apart, bound together by the rhythms of the land and the rituals of the church. It was a simple life, and for John Bell, his wife Lucy, and their growing family, it was a good one. They settled on a tract of land along the Red River, building a modest but comfortable home, raising crops, and earning the respect of the local community. By all accounts, John Bell was a man of faith and hard work, a deacon at the local church, a trusted neighbor, a husband and father. But in the fall of 1817, something shifted in the quiet of their farm. At first, it was subtle. John noticed strange animals in the fields, a dog with a rabbit's head, a large bird perched on the fence that vanished when approached. The children spoke of hearing whispers at night, just beyond their bedroom walls. Faint scratching sounds, knocks on the floorboards, the feeling of being watched. John dismissed it at first as imagination. The woods at night could play tricks on anyone's mind, but the noises grew louder, more persistent. The knocks became thuds, sometimes rattling the very beams of the house. Blankets were tugged off sleeping children. Shadows seemed to move on their own. And then, the whispers began to take shape. At first, they were unintelligible, murmurs drifting through the rooms, disembodied and chilling. But over the weeks, the whispers became words. Mocking words, angry words. Neighbors, curious and concerned, began to visit the Bells. Many left unsettled, having heard the same inexplicable noises themselves. Some claimed to hear a voice speak to them directly, faint but undeniable. Fear crept into the Bell household like a draft through a cracked door, and the family could no longer deny that something beyond their understanding was sharing their home. As the weeks passed, what began as whispers in the dark would escalate into one of the most infamous hauntings in American history. A presence the family could not see, but could hear, feel, and suffer at the hands of. A presence that would come to call itself Kate, the Bell Witch. And in the quiet hills of Tennessee, an ordinary family stood at the center of a story that has never been fully explained. To understand the events that would come to define the Bell Witch legend, we need to know the family at its heart. John Bell was born in North Carolina in 1750, and by the early 1800s he had established himself as a successful farmer and businessman. In 1804, he moved his wife Lucy and their children westward into Tennessee, settling on a rich plot of farmland along the Red River in Robertson County. The land was fertile, the house solid, and the future bright. The Bells quickly became one of the most respected families in the area. John worked hard, raised livestock, and expanded his holdings. Lucy was known for her kindness and hospitality. Together they raised several children, including Betsy, their only daughter, who would become a central figure in the haunting. Life on the frontier was not easy, but it was predictable. Days were long, filled with planting, tending, and worship. Sundays were for church, where John served as a deacon and Lucy was active in the congregation. The Bell children grew up with the values of hard work and faith. Betsy was described as sweet-tempered, with a shy smile that made her popular among her peers. The older sons helped on the farm, preparing to take over in time. But by 1817, cracks began to appear in the Bells' quiet life. John had recently been excommunicated from the Red River Baptist Church under charges that remain vague even today. Some said it was over a disputed land deal. Whatever the truth, the episode damaged his standing in the community. It was in the wake of this that strange occurrences began to trouble the family. At first, they tried to keep it private. After all, such stories could ruin a man's reputation even further. But as the disturbances grew louder and more aggressive, it became impossible to hide. What had once been a model home was now filled with fear and uncertainty. Neighbors began to whisper about the Bells. Some wondered if John's troubles at church had brought a curse upon him. Others suspected a neighbor or rival had somehow bewitched the family. But in the Bell house itself, there was no need for speculation. The family already knew something was in their home, and it was growing stronger. By the winter of 1817, the disturbances in the Bell household were no longer just noises in the night. At first, it was Betsy who seemed to suffer the most. She would wake in the middle of the night to feel her covers being yanked away. Sometimes her hair was pulled with such force it left her scalp red and tender. Other times, she would cry out in pain, her cheeks reddened by unseen slaps. The family tried to comfort her. Lucy stayed by her side, praying quietly through the night. But soon, others began to witness the same chilling phenomena. The noises, once faint, became deafening at times. Knocks on the walls, scratching at the floors, and the sound of chains dragging across the wooden boards. The entity, whatever it was, began to move objects around the house. Chairs slid across the room on their own. Doors slammed shut with no one near them. It didn't stop with Betsy. John himself was sometimes struck by invisible blows as he walked through his own home. And the younger children, too frightened to sleep, huddled together at night as the air filled with faint whispers that none of them could quite understand. In desperation, John confided in his friend and neighbor, James Johnston. Johnston, skeptical but concerned, agreed to spend the night in the Bell home with his wife. That night, as the family tried to sleep, the familiar noises began again. At first, just knocks, then the sound of sheets being pulled and faint laughter from nowhere. Johnston prayed aloud, asking God to reveal what this thing was. The knocks grew louder, answering him almost mockingly. His wife was slapped by an unseen hand. The next morning, Johnston admitted what everyone in the house already knew. Something beyond human understanding was present, and it seemed to thrive on fear. Word spread quickly through the community. Some came out of curiosity, others to pray. Ministers from nearby churches visited and were met with the same inexplicable phenomena and the eerie sound of a whispering voice that now grew clearer by the day. Witnesses claimed to hear the voice taunting John, mocking Betsy, and even reciting passages of Scripture. Those who came to disprove it often left pale and shaken. The attacks were no longer confined to the Bell family. The presence seemed to welcome an audience, and with every visitor, it grew bolder. In the heart of Tennessee, what started as a whisper in the dark was now a full-blown assault, and it was only beginning. By early 1818, the presence in the Bell home had found its voice. It began gradually, indistinct murmurs that seemed to drift through the air. But each night the words became clearer, sharper. Soon, it spoke in full sentences, answering questions and carrying on conversations. The family began to ask it directly, "Who are you?" At first, the entity gave vague replies. But one night, it declared, "I am Kate Batts' witch." Kate Batts was a neighbor of the Bells, a woman known in the community for her sharp tongue and frequent quarrels. Years earlier, she and John Bell had clashed over a land deal, and she reportedly accused him of cheating her. Some believed the spirit was a manifestation of her anger, or perhaps, as the entity claimed, she had sent it herself. From that moment on, the entity was often called simply Kate. But this was no ordinary spirit. It displayed intelligence and wit. It could mimic voices of people in the room, even when they were far from the house. It quoted scripture, sang hymns, and debated theology with visiting ministers. One preacher who stayed at the Bell home tried to silence the spirit through prayer. The voice interrupted him mid-sermon, quoting chapter and verse back at him with mocking precision. Another time, it sang every verse of a hymn the family did not know, only to laugh when no one could join in. But Kate was not always cruel. At times, the voice softened, particularly toward Lucy Bell, whom it called the most perfect woman to walk the earth. It even claimed to have traveled great distances in an instant, describing in detail what was happening in places miles away, details later confirmed as accurate. The community was divided. Some believed this was proof of a supernatural being. Others whispered a fraud, though no one could explain how such feats could be staged in an isolated farmhouse. Whatever it was, the entity now had a name, a personality, and a purpose. And while it sometimes offered comfort to Lucy, it continued to torment John and Betsy with relentless cruelty. Kate's voice became a constant presence in the home, mocking, debating, laughing, as if the Bell family no longer lived alone in their house, but shared it with something ancient and unseen. And yet, no one dared demand that it leave. It wasn't long before the Bell family's ordeal became the talk of Robertson County and beyond. By the spring of 1818, word of the strange events at the Bell farm had spread throughout Tennessee. Neighbors and strangers alike came to witness what they'd heard described as America's most chilling haunting. Some arrived as skeptics, determined to expose a hoax. Others came seeking proof of the supernatural. But most left unsettled, convinced they'd heard the voice of Kate for themselves. Visitors reported being slapped, having their hair pulled, or being mocked by the unseen spirit. Farmers, ministers, even entire families stayed overnight at the Bell house, and many refused to return. One of the most famous visitors was General Andrew Jackson, then a rising military leader who would later become president. According to local accounts, Jackson brought a small party to the Bell farm, eager to test the legend himself. As his wagon approached the property, the horses reportedly froze, refusing to move. A voice spoke from nowhere, saying, "You may proceed, General, but I will see you again tonight." That night, Jackson and his men reportedly heard the voice taunt them and felt invisible hands striking at them in the dark. At least one member of his party fled in terror before sunrise. Jackson himself is said to have left shaken, remarking that he would rather face the entire British army than spend another night at the Bell farm. Whether every detail of his visit is true remains debated. But what is certain is that by 1819, the Bell haunting was widely known, a strange and terrifying mystery that drew crowds for miles around. The Bell home became a kind of grim spectacle, a place where the boundary between the natural and the unexplainable seemed to thin. And through it all, the voice of Kate grew louder, more confident. No longer confined to the family, she now addressed anyone who dared enter her domain. The Bell family was no longer just fighting for peace in their home. They were living in the center of a story the entire region was watching unfold. By late 1819, the focus of the haunting had shifted. Although the entire family continued to suffer nightly disturbances, it was John Bell who became the entity's primary target. The voice of Kate singled him out, calling him Old Jack Bell, mocking him in front of visitors and vowing to take his life. At first, it was verbal torment, constant insults, curses, and derision that rattled even his considerable faith. Then came the physical afflictions. John began experiencing strange seizures. At odd moments during the day, his face would contort, his body stiffen, and his speech become slurred. His once strong frame weakened, and he struggled to keep up with the demands of the farm. Doctors who examined him were baffled. There was no clear explanation for his sudden deterioration. The family noticed that Kate seemed to revel in his suffering. On particularly bad days, the voice would laugh and declare that his end was near. Onlookers heard it say, "I'll get him yet," with a chilling certainty. Neighbors speculated wildly. Some believed Kate's wrath stemmed from John's disputed land deal with Kate Batts years earlier, though no one could explain how a living woman could unleash such a phenomenon. Others whispered about witchcraft, divine punishment, or even madness spreading through the family. But John himself seemed resigned to his fate. In the evenings, he sat silently by the fire, pale and trembling, while Kate's voice hissed cruel words from the shadows. Even in public, the torment followed him. At church services, the entity would interrupt prayers with mocking laughter, embarrassing him in front of the congregation. In town, people whispered as he passed, unsure whether to pity him or fear him. His once proud reputation was now overshadowed by his role as the victim of something inexplicable and unrelenting. As 1820 began, John's condition worsened. He spent more and more time confined to his bed, barely able to speak above a whisper himself. The family did what they could to comfort him, but there was no relief from the nightly assaults. Kate's voice grew bolder, sometimes even singing loudly just outside his bedroom door, daring him to get up and face her. For John Bell, The struggle was no longer about saving his home or his good name. It became a battle simply to stay alive as the unseen force closed in on him, piece by piece. And Kate promised she would not stop until he was gone. On the morning of December 19th, 1820, John Bell did not wake. His breathing through the night had been shallow, and by dawn he was unresponsive. Lucy Bell, desperate to help him, noticed a small vial of dark liquid sitting on the bedside table, a vial no one in the family claimed to have seen before. When they confronted the entity about it, the voice of Kate rang out triumphantly, "It's useless for you to try to save him. I gave old Jack a big dose of it last night, and he'll never get up from that bed again." The family and neighbors gathered in the room, horrified as the spirit gloated over John's condition. Later that day, he was pronounced dead. He was 70 years old. The family, suspecting the mysterious liquid in the vial, decided to test it. A drop was placed on the tongue of a cat, which reportedly died almost instantly. The vial was then thrown into the fireplace, where it burst into bright blue flames and shot up the chimney. At John Bell's funeral, neighbors and friends came from all over Robertson County to pay their respects. But even in death, Kate would not let him rest. As the minister delivered the eulogy, the mocking voice of the spirit filled the churchyard, laughing loudly and singing bawdy drinking songs that drowned out the prayers. Witnesses were stunned. Some fled. Others stood in shocked silence as the entity continued its eerie celebration. For 3 years, John Bell had endured unimaginable torment at the hands of something unseen. And now, even in death, it claimed victory over him. The community buried John on the family farm. His grave, simple and unadorned, became a quiet place of mourning. But for the Bell family, peace would remain elusive. Kate's laughter lingered in the night air for days after his burial, as if to remind everyone that the story was far from over. John Bell may have been gone, but the haunting continued. Even after John Bell's death, the entity showed no signs of leaving. Its focus shifted once more, this time to Betsy Bell, the family's only daughter. By 1820, Betsy was a young woman of marriageable age. She had long been engaged to Joshua Gardner, a local schoolteacher and well-liked young man. The couple's engagement was expected to unite two respected families in the community. But Kate made it clear that she did not approve. The voice, which once showered Betsy with sympathy and affection during her father's decline, now turned harsh and menacing. At night, it tormented her with cruel insults, accusing her of making a terrible mistake. Whenever Joshua visited the farm, the activity escalated. Visitors reported hearing the entity mutter threats and scream obscenities whenever the two were alone together. Betsy became withdrawn, her once bright demeanor fading under the constant psychological strain. Even away from the Bell farm, Betsy found no peace. The entity seemed to follow her, whispering in her ear, accusing her of betraying her family, and warning her that marriage to Joshua would bring ruin. For months, she endured the harassment in silence. But by 1821, Betsy broke. She called off the engagement. When asked why, she offered no clear explanation, only that she could not go through with it. Joshua, devastated and confused, left the area soon afterward. Almost immediately, the spirit's torment of Betsy subsided. The whispers quieted. The slaps and pinches ceased. It was as if Kate's work was done. Why the entity was so intent on preventing Betsy's marriage to Joshua remains one of the greatest mysteries of the Bell Witch story. Some speculate it was jealousy. Others believe it was rooted in something darker, perhaps a family secret long since lost to history. What is clear is that after Betsy ended her engagement, the haunting began to fade. The family could sleep through the night again. Visitors stopped hearing the mocking voice. Even the townsfolk began to wonder if the Bell, which had finally gone. But for Betsy, the scars of the ordeal never truly healed. She would marry years later to a different man and leave the Red River settlement behind. But she carried the memory of those years and the whispers of Kate with her for the rest of her life. After Betsy broke her engagement, the activity in the Bell home gradually faded. By By the spring of 1821, Kate's voice was heard less and less, her presence receding into silence. The family could finally rest without fear of whispered threats in the dark. But before vanishing entirely, the entity reportedly made a chilling promise. One night, Kate's voice told the family it would leave, but only for now. It claimed it would return in exactly 7 years. And according to some accounts, it did. In 1828, several members of the Bell family reported hearing the familiar voice once more. For a few short weeks, strange sounds returned to the house. Knocks on the walls, faint laughter, and the eerie singing that had once tormented them so completely. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone again. Whether this second visitation truly occurred remains debated. Some believe the family's fear of the past shaped their perception of ordinary events. Others argue the entity's intelligence and persistence made its return inevitable. Regardless, the story of the Bell which lived on, whispered in Tennessee homes, retold around campfires, written down in diaries and letters. By the late 19th century, the tale had grown into one of America's most enduring ghost stories. In 1894, historian Martin Van Buren Ingram published an authenticated history of the Bell, which, compiling the oral traditions, family accounts, and testimonies of neighbors. His book brought the legend to a national audience, cementing the Bell, which is one of the most famous hauntings in American folklore. To this day, visitors still travel to Adams, Tennessee, where the Bell farm once stood. Though the house itself is long gone, the land remains, quiet and unassuming, yet charged with an unsettling energy that many claim to feel. Nearby, the Bell Witch Cave has become a focal point of local legend. It's said the spirit took refuge there after leaving the house, and even now, tourists report strange sensations, unexplained noises, and fleeting shadows within its depths. The story has inspired countless books, plays, and films, most notably in American Haunting, though many dramatizations stray far from the documented facts. Still, the core mystery remains. What happened to the Bell family between 1817 and 1821? Was an elaborate hoax, mass hysteria, or something beyond human understanding? 2 centuries later, no one can say for certain. But in the quiet hills of Tennessee, the legend of the Bell, which still lingers, a reminder that some stories refuse to die. More than 2 centuries have passed since the haunting of the Bell family. Yet the questions it raised remain as unsettling as ever. Was it the result of a neighbor's grudge taken to an extraordinary level? Some believe the feud with Kate Batts fueled the spirit's wrath, but there was never any proof she had anything to do with it. Others speculated the Bell, which was nothing more than an elaborate hoax, perhaps orchestrated by members of the family themselves, or by outsiders seeking to shame John Bell over his disputed land deals and church excommunication. Then there are those who believe the Bells fell victim to a collective psychological breakdown, what today might be called mass hysteria. But even these explanations leave gaps. Too many witnesses, too many independent accounts, too many strange details that defy easy answers. For believers, the Bell which stands as evidence of something inexplicable, a force beyond our comprehension, capable of thought, malice, and cunning. What is known, and what can be documented, are the names of the people who lived through it. John Bell, buried on his farm under a modest stone. Betsy Bell, who lived into adulthood, her childhood haunted by memories she never fully escaped. Lucy Bell, who endured it all with quiet faith, her grace earning even the grudging respect of the entity itself. And of course, Kate, whatever Kate truly was, who left her mark on the hills of Tennessee so indelibly that her name is still spoken today. The Bell Witch legend remains one of America's most enduring mysteries, because it is more than just a ghost story. It is a reminder of how fragile our sense of reality can be. It asks uncomfortable questions about what lurks at the edges of our understanding. And it dares us to listen to the faint knock on the wall, the whisper in the dark, and wonder what it really means. Even now, some say, if you stand near the old Bell Witch Cave at dusk, you can hear her laugh. And you can decide for yourself whether you believe. What do you think of today's story? What dark chapter should we open next? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like and subscribe. Close the book if you can. This is Black Chapter.